Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on Forgotten Weapons. I'm Ian. I'm here at the Rock Island Auction House. I'm taking a look at some of the guns they're going to be selling in their upcoming June of 2016 regional auction. And here is a very nice example of something that's not quite a 1911, but it's a copy of a 1911 mostly. And it's actually a pretty rare gun, and I wanted to take a look at this one and describe it to you guys. This is a model of 1920 Star automatic pistol. Now, it's mechanically mostly a copy of the Browning of the 1911. Certainly it is in the tilting barrel mechanism. And this is sort of the beginning, in fact this is the beginning, this is the first locked breech pistol made by Star. They would go on to make many, many more. Star was in business until the late 80s or early 90s in Spain. And while a lot of their guns aren't particularly well appreciated, a lot of them were actually very good. So the story behind this one is that Star had made a number of 32 ACP blowback pistols. They made guns, Star was a trade name that they adopted, but earlier they were one of the companies that had been making pistols for the French and the Italian militaries during World War I, the simple Eiber style 32 blowbacks. And with the war over, the gun trade decreased significantly. A lot of companies went out of business. It was just a lot harder to maintain without this huge war driving sales. So Star was looking into some other options, and they decided to make themselves a locked breech, larger caliber pistol. Now they intended this for military use, or they hoped for military use, and in fact this was tested by the Spanish Army in 1920. The Spanish Army testing, however, came back inconclusive. They couldn't make up their mind. The Army would go on to do some more testing in 1921, and they would ultimately adopt the Astra model of 400, which is a tubular blowback, straight blowback pistol. However, in 1920, the Spanish Guardia Civil, basically the national federal police force, they also needed or wanted a new pistol to replace a bunch of their old revolvers, and they were counting on the Army testing to basically pick a gun for them. And when the Army came back with an inconclusive result, the Guardia Civil lost patience, basically. They didn't want to wait around for another set of testing. They looked at the Army results and they said, that Star looks pretty darn good to us. They liked the fact that it was a locked breech pistol, unlike the Astra, and so they went ahead and adopted it. They ordered about 9,000 of them, 9,017 specifically, and production started and deliveries started. And ultimately, about 3,850 model of 1920s were produced and delivered to the Guardia Civil. The remainder of the order, about 5,000 more pistols, were actually made with some updates. They were a 1921 pattern gun. So we'll get into what those updates were in a minute. For now, let's bring the camera back and take a closer look at the details of this, because this blends the Browning locking system with the trigger group of an Eiber pistol and some other interesting details. All right, so while this looks mostly like a 1911, especially if you squint a little bit, it does have some visible differences. The grip angle and the grip itself looks a bit different. There is no grip safety on the 1920, and it has a solid backstrap. So the 1911 has a mainspring back here and a removable backstrap for accessing it. That wasn't an issue in the Star. They did the trigger group a bit differently, so they have a solid backstrap. No grip safety. There is no thumb safety back here. Instead, the manual safety is up here on the slide. And it's a pretty simple, interesting safety. In fact, we'll just take a look at that right now. So this is currently set to safe, and you can see that the firing pin is nowhere to be found. When I set this to fire, now we have a visible firing pin. What they've done here is cut the firing pin into two pieces, and so you have the main firing pin down here in the slide, and then you have this short section at the back, which is what the hammer actually hits. So when the safety is engaged, if you drop the hammer, which you still can do, the safety doesn't do anything to the trigger. If I drop the hammer like that, it does nothing because it just hits on this solid block. It's only when the safety is disengaged, the rear portion of the firing pin becomes exposed. When I hit that with the hammer now, it goes through and fires a cartridge. Now, instead of having gripping serrations, it has these two scalloped sections pulled out or cut out of the slide. So that's how you get a grip on the slide to cycle it. The sights on this guy are actually not that bad. The sight itself is small, but that open U notch is in some way arguably better than a Colt's. Yeah, it's not bad. Markings on the side, Bonifacio Echevarria, Eiber, España. And then they have this rather elaborate early star logo. Some of that has been polished off before the refinish, but you get the idea. And then, of course, their trade name Star, caliber 9mm. Some of these guns were made or retrofitted for export, and when that was done, if they were modified to also use the 38 ACP cartridge, you will see a 38 added here, caliber 9mm/38 or 9mm and 38. The 38 there is 38 ACP. It's important to note that that is not the same as 38 Super, which is a similar but substantially more potent cartridge, which you do not want to shoot through these guns. It's also important to note, of course, that 9mm is 9mm Largo. That's 9x23. These are not compatible with 9mm Parabellum, 9x19. You have to get 9 Largo ammunition for these. Disassembly here is pretty easy, fairly similar to a Colt. However, where the Colt had the pair of spring-loaded detents for the safety and the slide stop, on this one the detent is built into the slide stop itself, which makes it a little bit easier to take apart. So I'm just going to slide the slide back until this cutout lines up with the slide stop. Then I can pull it straight out, and then the slide comes off the front of the gun, and I'm going to push that spring down so that it stays captive in there. You can see this is a Browning swinging link on the barrel. Pretty typical. There's really not a whole lot else going in here, and I'm not going to mess around with pulling the spring out because that's just like a 1911. Extractor is a bit different. You can see the extractor pin is right there, spring under the back, and it hooks over here, and that has that nice high polish blue. All right, I have undone the screws on this grip panel. If we take those off, we can look at the firing mechanism here. As I said, this is very similar to an Eiber pistol. We have a link coming back from the trigger. It's going to push on this. That is connected to a flat sear here. It's hard to see inside this pistol, but the sear basically hooks underneath the front of the hammer and holds it back. When I pull the trigger back, the sear pivots on that pin, and it's a flat piece like this. So it's going to pivot forward like that, which pulls it out from under the hammer and allows the hammer to drop. Like that. Now, in addition, we also have this, which is both an out-of-battery safety and a disconnector. So at this point, let's say I've pulled the trigger and the hammer is forward, and when the action cycles, it's going to recock the hammer, which is good. And then as the slide pushes backwards, it's going to force this bar to come down. When that bar comes down, it pushes the trigger bar off of this block, which then allows the block to reset. So that acts as a disconnector, which prevents it from firing more than one time with each pull of the trigger. This also, if that's pushing down, like, yeah, it's a little stiff in there. If it's pushing down like that, I can pull the trigger and nothing happens. That is what would, that's what would be the case if I were trying to fire the gun with the slide not in battery. This little cutout, that half moon cutout right there, allows this bar to come up only when the slide is properly in battery. So if the slide is slightly open, this pushes down and disconnects the trigger, prevents me from being able to fire it in a dangerous condition. So this mechanism is really exactly the same as what was used in the vast number of .32 caliber Eiber pistols. It's a simple trigger mechanism, but it works well, it's reliable, and it's safe. Now I mentioned that only the first 3,850 of these pistols made for the Guardia Civil were made in this 1920 pattern. The remaining 5,017 of them were made in the 1921 pattern, which included a number of upgrades that had been requested by the Guardia Civil. Those included, they got rid of this safety and gave it a thumb safety. They actually gave it a grip safety as well, although that didn't last very long. And the sight, the rear sight, was made windage adjustable, unlike this fixed sight. Now, that 1921 pattern was submitted to the follow-up Spanish Army testing, where it then lost to the Astra 400. However, the 1921 pattern gun was also sold by Star commercially under the name Model A. So the 1920s, pretty limited production. The 1921/Model A was made in much greater numbers. So. Now, what's kind of funny to me is the Guardia Civil had these pistols from 1920 onward. The Army, of course, took a different path. And after World War II in 1945, the Army came back and their Astras were getting old, and they were looking to replace them with something newer and better. And so they ran another series of tests. And the pistol that won the Army tests in 1945 was the Star Model A, which is basically this gun with some cosmetic changes and a few little tweaks. So the Army, while they diverged from the Guardia Civil early, they actually came back to the Browning system after World War II. Now, the 1920 here, of course, is one of the first batch. It's been refinished. It looks gorgeous now, and pretty rare. Like I said, only a little under 4,000 of these were made for the Guardia Civil. If you'd like to have this one, of course, it is coming up for sale here. This is an auction house, after all, where I'm visiting. And so if you take a look at the description text below, you'll find Rock Island's catalog page for this pistol. You can take a look at their pictures and description. And if you're interested, you can place a bid right there online. Thanks for watching.